Left, 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 right, left, left.
Raise it up.
Left.
M79 gonna raise it. Okay, that's fine.
Now it is my honor to welcome former Sergeant Thomas Kuhar, U.S. Army, Clayton High, class of 1967. He's received the Combat Infantry Medal. He was in Vietnam from 1969 and 1970, and he's a recipient of the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. In addition, the Combat Infantry Badge for his service in Vietnam. Mr. Kuhar.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate everybody being here today, and I'm absolutely humbled and extremely honored to be speaking before you today. I can't thank enough, particularly my friend since 1961, Frank Lally, who I've known since I was 12 years old. I was one of his first customers when he came to Clayton, and we've remained friends all these years. For telling me about the nomination. When it was first mentioned to me by Frank, I declined, and I said, certainly, Frank, you have somebody more worthy than me to be given this esteemed honor. And he said, don't turn it down, just think about it for a couple days and get back to me. And he said, while you're thinking about it, think about what you might say. So during those couple days, I did think about what I might say, and I thought of a couple topics that I thought possibly I might be able to pass along some information that might be helpful either to a fellow veteran or one of their family members that might bring some comfort. So if I accomplish that today, then I've accomplished everything I expected to do today. So let me tell you first a little bit about my background. My life here in Clayton. I came to Clayton with my family from Philadelphia. We lived in the Fishtown section of Philadelphia, and we moved here right before I started kindergarten, and I remained here until I was drafted into the United States Army in 1968. I grew up literally a stone's throw from here at 132 East Clinton Street. And I was neighbors with the O'Briens, who lived right next door. Bonnie O'Brien is here. She's actually the wife of Jeff Walding, who I've become friends with through this process. And next to the O'Briens were the Hickles, my best friend, my longest term friend in this world, Jack Hickle, who was also, his wife is the best friend of one of the committee members, Nancy Fox, who's here today with us. And my best friend growing up, Larry Darby, lived around the corner on Howard Street, and it was a wonderful place to grow up. Between this cemetery and my house, there was no houses here at that time. There was a path that ran across to here almost to my backyard, and behind my house there was basically a sandlot ball field that the Glick family owned that lived here on Academy Street. And they didn't really farm it for a number of years, so it became our place to play football, baseball during baseball season, and a place to do about everything we did. When we went outside in the morning, we'd stay out on that field for most of the day. If I wasn't on that ball field, likely about 10 feet off the ground in a sycamore tree that still exists. I saw it as we were coming through today. That was on the back of the property on what was the Glick family estate, I thought it was, here on Academy Street. And we spent a lot of fine days just sitting in that tree, carving initials of girlfriends and talking about what we were going to be when we grew up, and things like that. But it was a beautiful tree. It's still a beautiful tree today. I'm glad to see, and it brings back a lot of fine memories to come down this street. Jack Hickle, who I mentioned earlier, my longest term friend, was and is the finest, most gifted athlete I've ever personally known. Jack was always, from the time I first met him up until today, a much more gifted athlete than me, and we had a lot of fine times in athletics. Everything came very easy to him, but I enjoyed competing along with him. I scored my only touchdown on this field right here on Thanksgiving Day on a pass from Jack. I was a very mediocre athlete. Jack ended up playing for Lafayette College as the starting quarterback under Harry Gamble, who also used to coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. And my wife Claire and I went out to see Jack and Irene several years ago on a trip out across the country. And Jack disclosed to me during that trip, he said, when you went off to kindergarten, he said, I was traumatized. He said, here I was 4 years old, and I lost my best friend who went off to kindergarten, had nobody to play with. So that's how far back we go, and how long we've been friends. A little bit about my military career, which is not what we're here about today, but I'll tell you a little bit about it because I think some of what I experienced may relate to somebody here. I was drafted into the Army on my 19th birthday on December 6, 1968. I opened up the mail on my birthday morning. I had 3 birthday cards, an acceptance to Glassboro State College, and I had a draft notice from Uncle Sam. So the draft notice took precedence over everything else that day. Shortly thereafter, I was inducted in the United States Army in Newark, New Jersey, and that same day after being sworn in, was transferred to Fort Dix for basic training. And I stayed at Fort Dix for an entire year, training really to go to Vietnam. And during that year, I went to basic training, advanced infantry training, trainee leadership school. I then was transferred to Fort Benning, Georgia, and went to non-commissioned officer school. And then I was transferred to Fort Polk, Louisiana, where I acted as a temporary drill sergeant to train a troop of basic trainees in Louisiana before I myself went to Vietnam. And I was very fortunate. On the very first day I was inducted into the Army as a brand new 19-year-old young man with no experience, never been on a plane, never been hardly anywhere outside of New Jersey, to meet a fellow who for some reason became my friend, who was as opposite of me as you could be. Here I was, 19 years old, with complete naivety to almost everything, and I meet this guy who's just under the draft age at that time, which was 26. He was just under 26 when he got drafted. He had a master's degree from Southern Illinois University. He had movie star good looks, and he had a charm that charmed everybody. Women, drill sergeants, everybody he met. And he had a little bit of bullshit, which also helped. And that fellow happens to be here today. I'd like you to recognize him and welcome him home, Staff Sergeant David Hannigan. David? Whoa, whoa, whoa. That was close.
That's right. You want to go free?
Yeah, I'll try. Just do better. I also became aware just yesterday that there's a fellow who is here today also, who served in the United States Army as a medic during the time that I was in Vietnam, who I only met this morning actually, by the name of John Boyle. And I'd like you to welcome home John Boyle, who's here in our audience today. John? what I'd like to do first this morning is to give you a perspective of the ultimate sacrifice. We all know what it is. I'm preaching to the choir here to talk to you about the ultimate sacrifice. But I thought what I might do is give you a little bit of a different perspective of someone who didn't make the ultimate sacrifice, but witnessed far too many people who did firsthand. And what I'm sure I felt and witnessed was witnessed by people who fought in battle probably forever throughout history, where people lost lives. And the first thing that happens when you survive a battle while your brothers and your comrades are falling next to you is you ask yourself, why? Why did I survive? And my brother did not. There's not a good answer to that, not a clear answer to that, but I always looked at it that God had a purpose, God had a reason. Excuse me. I came home from Vietnam feeling not only a loss for the brothers I lost, which was again far too many, but I felt a sense of guilt that I came home. I literally came home, by the way, being airlifted out of the jungle and transferred to college within a week of when I was airlifted out of the jungles, which was an amazing transformation back then. But all of a sudden I was in a college classroom, and it was quite an adjustment, believe me, at that time. But fortunately, I went on to live a very productive life. I'm blessed in so many ways. I have the love of my life sitting right here, my wife Claire, who, God willing, will be married 43 years come August. I have 3 of my 4 children are here with me today. My daughter Jennifer is here with her husband Bill. My son Jacob, my son Kevin is here with his lovely wife Alyssa. And my daughter Andrea and her soulmate Hector are here. Andrea's actually videoing our ceremony here this morning. But I'm very fortunate to have my children with me. I'm also fortunate when I came home from Vietnam that I was able to have my brother Jim, my older brother Jim, graduated in 1959. He was here with us today, fortunately. My older sister Eileen is here with us, who graduated in 1961. Her husband Bill also graduated here in 1961. And Joe's husband Ron is all here. Ron Felice, who I've known since first grade. So I have all these people with me, and I've had all these wonderful experiences all these years. But I will tell you that I never go through one of these joyous events, whether it be a marriage, an anniversary, a Christmas. I've experienced 51 Christmases since I've returned from Vietnam. I've never experienced any of these without thinking, at least momentarily, about those people who never had the good fortune to do that. Not only were they not able to do that, their families were robbed of that experience. So the ultimate sacrifice is just a tremendous debt that is paid on behalf of our country, and we can never thank these people enough. I'm glad that we're trying. I hope we never stop trying to at least show respect for that. There's 2 topics I mentioned in the beginning of this talk that I'd like to at least address for a moment. One is post-traumatic stress syndrome, Ptsd, which is something that I had no idea that I was having a problem with. For 40 years, I, like a lot of Vietnam veterans, held everything inside. I didn't think, first of all, anyone cared to hear about any of my experiences, and I didn't really care to tell anybody about them. And I would try and politely answer any direct questions I got, but I really had no desire to talk about it. I kept it so deep in my subconscious, I got to a point where I didn't really know for sure it ever really happened. A friend of mine, who became a friend of mine, about 9 years ago, my wife and I were moving out of a home that we lived in Mays Landing, and he came over to look at some furniture and some items we had for sale before we downsized to where we currently live. And somehow he noticed that I was a Vietnam combat veteran. Well, this fellow, by the name of Dave Colafranson, served in Iraq, is a very, very active Vietnam veteran advocate himself. He's actually the commander of the Hamilton American Legion today, but he's done a tremendous job helping vets wherever he can. So he started asking me some probing questions that day that were, first of all, uncomfortable for me, and secondly, they were actually very irritating in a lot of ways. But during that visit, he convinced me that I should go down to Wilmington to the Veterans Hospital and get a complete physical and register for Agent Orange. And he knew that I was actually in the infantry, actually walking around out there where Agent Orange was sprayed. And he said, you know, you really got to get registered for this because there's a good chance you might have some after effects of this chemical that was sprayed while you were there. So I in fact did that, and during that physical, I was actually examined by 2 psychiatrists, and they were female psychiatrists. They did a terrific job somehow. I don't know quite how they did what they did, but they got me to talk about things I never talked to my wife about, never talked to my good friends about. And when I left their offices, I actually felt a little better. I felt like a little burden had been lifted. But sometime later, I learned that I was diagnosed with PTSD, and eventually I started getting treatment for that. And when I got treatment for PTSD, which took place in Northfield at their Veterans Clinic by a psychologist that I'm totally indebted to, named Dr. Corey, I learned a lot about myself. Claire went to some of these sessions with me, and she learned a lot about me. That there things, for example, like for almost 50 years at that point, I would walk around in the middle of the night, almost every night, without fail. And I never knew why I did that. Never knew why I got up, never knew why I walked around. Well, I came to learn that I was probably on guard duty subconsciously, protecting my family. And there was some other signs that were detected, many other signs of things that it came to be understood. I was always, and still am today, a real stickler for punctuality. I hate when people are not punctual. I try to be as punctual as I possibly can. I look at it as a sign of disrespect when people aren't punctual. And to a lot of people, it's just not important. But to me, when I served in Vietnam, when you were supposed to be at a certain spot at a certain time, it was very important that you be at that spot at that time. Another thing that I learned, and this was probably for 35 years, the biggest problem my wife and I had in the way of arguments to each other was about navigation in a car. This was pre-navigation when we used to use maps. And my wife had no desire, no ability to read a map. She didn't care. She had no desire. And I would say, honey, we're here. We're going to go here. How do we get there? She said, I don't know. And to me, it was always extremely important. And I never really thought about it, never thought why it was so important to me, but it was important because in Vietnam, all the resources that were available to me as a squad leader in an infantry platoon, you really had to know where you were. You had to know to call in a medevac, you had to know to call in a gunship, to call in artillery, to call in the mail, to call in food, to call in another unit. You better know where you are. If you didn't know where you are, there's a good chance you were going to call in the wrong thing on the wrong people. So, to this day, I'm a stickler on knowing where I am. I now understand a lot better those type of things. But I bring up all these things not to talk about me, but to tell you that maybe some of you know somebody who fought, maybe not in Vietnam, but in Iraq or Afghanistan, who has some of these traits that are in fact treatable and understandable, first of all. But there's many types of PTSD. There's anger, substance abuse. There's all different kinds of ways of releasing these feelings from these traumatic experiences. But there are ways to treat these kinds of things. So I encourage any of you who know somebody who may have an issue, first of all, give them a hug. Let them know that they're not alone. Let them know that there's help out there. There's 400,000 people who work for our Veterans Administration. It's an absolutely overwhelming organization. Has a tremendous amount of resources available to veterans. But getting through the maze to find out what's available and how you get to use it, you gotta have advocates. And I was fortunate to learn about advocates and have people like David Collifranson, who I mentioned, our local county representatives who have offices to help veterans, the state level, the American Legion, the VFW. All these places are sources to help you get through this maze. But you need to be persistent, and you need to not give up, because there's sources out there, sources you probably would never even imagine are available. Not just medical, but there's financial sources, there's legal sources, there's sources of all types that are available. Are all these people good at what they do? No, they're not. So you gotta go in with a thick skin, saying to yourself, you know, I may not get the right person the first time, but I'm going to persevere because I deserve to be treated with respect, and I deserve to be helped. So if somebody in this audience can pass that along to somebody else you may know, I would be very indebted to you that you know, we've done a good thing today. The second thing I'd like to briefly mention is the veterans suicide awareness. A good friend of mine, John DeMarco, and his Absecon Knights of Columbus committee were kind enough to go out of their normal area of operation and put the display that many of you saw this morning at Clayton's Borough Hall, which is a very effective display to remind people about veterans suicide awareness and what a problem it is today. But those flags, of which there's 660, represent about how many veterans commit suicide every month. So that works out to 30 veterans a day, every day, commit suicide. And suicide is something that's preventable. It's not something that has to happen. Just to give you a couple more statistics about veteran suicide. Veteran suicide occurs twice as much as non-veterans suicide in the United States. Since September 11th, 2001, the amount of veteran suicides that have occurred is 8 times the amount of people who have died in combat. Think about that for a second. 8 times the amount of people who have died in combat have committed suicide. So it's a tragic problem that goes on. First question you might ask yourself, well, what can I do about it? So first of all, again, maybe you give that person a hug who feels hopeless. You may not know that they feel hopeless, but you may see some signs that they have a problem. You know, their anger, they're shutting themselves away from other people. There's all kinds of reasons for suicide from what experts have analyzed. The victim becomes from any age, any race, any gender, any kind of circumstance. The legal problems, marital problems, substance abuse problems, all kind of different problems cause people to commit suicide. But the fact is, all the experts agree, nobody has to do it. And it doesn't have to be hopeless. So if you can keep just a little eye out, a little ear out for those people that look like they're desperate and maybe have given up, there's ways to help them, those people. And if you can help one of them in your lifetime, then you've done an awful good thing. So I would like to close my comments today. I came across a prayer. It's actually called the Memorial Day Prayer by Father Soloy. that was posted just in this month's Vietnam Veterans Magazine. So before I read the prayer, which will close my remarks, I got curious about Father Phil Soloy, and I Googled him and looked up to see what he was about. Well, Father Soloy was not a priest when he served in Vietnam, and he actually served in the 199th Light Infantry Brigade at about the same time that I was in Vietnam. And he had an occurrence one day where he had 4 of his comrades who were trapped by the North Vietnamese down in the southern part of Vietnam. And he was witnessing these people becoming surrounded by these North Vietnamese. And he said a prayer to the Lord, and he said, Lord, if you'll let me somehow help these people and come out of this alive, I'll give my life to you. I'll do whatever you ask. So he went in with another fellow who volunteered to go with him, and he rescued all 4 of these people. And for that, he was awarded the Silver Star for bravery. And he went in, by the way, with the M79 Grenade Launcher. And for those of you who served in the military might be familiar with what an M79 Grenade Launcher is, probably not the most effective weapon to go into a battle with a bunch of North Vietnamese. It's a single shot thing. It looks almost like a sawed-off shotgun. Has a bullet that's about this big and about this round, and it shoots 1 shot at a time. So it's pretty miraculous that he did, in fact, accomplish what he laid out to do. And several years later, he got the calling, and he felt that the Lord spoke to him and asked him, here's how you can repay me. Become a priest and help other veterans. And this prayer I'm about to read, again, was composed by Father Soloy just for this Memorial Day. But I'm going to close by reading this prayer, and hopefully you appreciate it as I did. Heavenly Father, Grandfather Spirit, as our nation pauses today to remember those in the military who have given their lives for the freedoms we enjoy, we pray that you would have us all look for you for strength, comfort, and guidance. Be with all who serve in our armed forces. Bless them and their families. Grant your loving protection. Let peace prevail among all the nations. O God, especially for the brutal war that is going on in Ukraine. We implore you to soften the hearts, minds, and souls of those perpetrating this evil and senseless war. Let your mercy rest upon our land, even as we acknowledge with thanksgiving your past goodness to this country. It is your will to preserve the lives of the men and women in uniform as they defend our citizenry. We must never forget those who never return to us, our prisoners of war and those still missing in action. May they all rest in your eternal peace. We pray thee, O Lord. Amen. Amen. Thank you all.
Now I'd like to call upon former U.S. Navy Les Wise, former U.S. Army Robert Ness for the placing in a memorial wreath. Now called to the podium former U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Stacy Ryan for the reading of the fallen.
Private Branson Lloyd, U.S. Army. Homer L. Ewan, U.S. Army. W. Stout Cheeseman, U.S. Navy. Harold K. Costal, U.S. Navy. John B. Brown, U.S. Army. Harry Alexander, U.S. Army Air Force. Earl Stanley Dennis, U.S. Army Air Force. Russell S. Scott, U.S. Coast Guard. Richard E. Hogus Jr., U.S. Navy. Claude W. Matthews, U.S. Air Force. Gary C. Coyle, U.S. Army. James Hagelstein, U.S. Marine Corps. David J. Bentz III, U.S. Army.
Now I'm going to call upon former U.S. Army Frank Lally to raise the flag to full staff. Now for our prayer benediction, I call again on Pastor Paul Amy, Clayton United Methodist Trinity Church.
As we go from this place, let us hear these words of blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our ceremony. There's a couple of announcements I'd like to make. First, I'd like to thank the Clayton Police Department, Fire Department for assisting in our ceremony today. The U.S. Air Force 177 Fighter Wing, Clayton Elks Lodge, number 2132, Boy Scout Troop 292, and the troop leader Bruce Schultz, Clayton Cemetery Board of Trustees, and President Matt DeChristopher, Clayton High School JROTC, Major Smedley, and High School Band Director Dave Dashkowski. I'd like to thank John DeMarco for helping us put up the flags of forgotten soldiers at the Borough Hall. I'd like to thank Mayor and Council for allowing my Elks Lodge to participate in today's ceremony. A special thanks to my new friend, Tom Kuhar, for his special message.